Good evening, everybody. It is often said in this town that elections have consequences. The outcome of the last two elections seemed perfectly crafted to persuade any doubters that this conventional wisdom is indeed demonstrable truism. First, in 2016, when the Electoral College gave the most vulgar, unethical, democratic norm-breaking, and mendacious president in our great nation's history, a president seemingly hell-bent in destroying our sacred democratic institutions. But also, in 2018, when the American people voted to reject the vulgarity of Trump and Trumpism. We voted for accountability. We voted to repudiate bigotry. We voted to restore the integrity of our governmental institutions. We voted for our collective values. We voted to ensure greater inclusivity. We voted to take this nation back. Elections do indeed have consequences. And in the process of doing so, America elected an incoming congressional class that is younger, more progressive, and more diverse than any in American history. Many flipped red seats to blue. A third of them in this class are lawyers. Progressive lawyers. And tonight, we have the tremendous opportunity and great honor to meet and hear from three of them, from the freshman congressional class. Congressman Colin Allred hails from the 32nd District of Texas. Having defeated longtime incumbent Pete Sessions. He is both a former NFL linebacker and a distinguished civil rights attorney. My good friend, Representative Sharice Davids, represents the 3rd Congressional District of Kansas. A district long held in Republican hands, but no more. She is a lawyer and former White House fellow. This January, when she was sworn in, Congresswoman Davids became one of 2 first ever Native American women to serve in Congress in American history. Last, but definitely not least, Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton represents the 10th District of Virginia. She, too, is a lawyer and has served Virginia as a jurist, a prosecutor, and a state senator. Our moderator this evening is Kimberly Adkins, senior news correspondent at WBUR and an MSNBC contributor, and I found out this evening a very successful clothing designer. Please join me in warmly welcoming this extraordinary panel.
I don't think it matters. I think we were alpha order, but it's fine. I think
Oh, yeah.
I think
You want to go? Here's
the two of you, but I'm sorry. We're all friends here. It's okay. Thank you so much, Ambassador Harper, and to ACS for having me here to moderate what will be an extraordinary panel, a good discussion, of course. As Ambassador Harper mentioned, there was a time that being a lawyer was almost a given to people who were elected. What's happening? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay.
Just don't move.
All right, I will try to stay as still as I possibly can. There was a time that being an attorney was almost a given when it came to elected members of Congress. But we have learned from a couple of studies by Harvard and Yale that there has been a decline in the number of lawyers who are elected to office here in Washington. A third may seem like a lot of people. A third of the incoming freshman class are members of Congress, but that represents a steep decline from a majority from just a decade or more ago. And that has consequences, especially at a time when a lot of folks are very concerned about how Congress operates and about the rule of law and the people who are in charge to oversee it. And that's the lens through which I will have our discussion tonight with 3 freshman members of Congress. And I want to start it off by asking all of you, how has being a lawyer, your legal background, all of you have practiced, all of you have had that experience, how do you think that has shaped the way you think about legislative oversight in a broad sense, the way you think about the rule of law? We'll start with you, Congressman Allred.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you to ACS for having us. I'm happy to be here with 2 of my colleagues. We have elected an incredible class. And so if you are out there and if you're worried about the country, I really think that you should look to this freshman Democratic class if you're looking for a little bit of hope. A lot of us flipped red states. A lot of us, flipped a seat. We did it by running on our values. We did it by talking to our neighbors. We did it by people like some of you who spent your time in Dallas, where I represent, knocking on doors in 100-degree heat. But my career as a lawyer, I think, the way it influenced how I see Congress is that I believe in our institutions. I believe in our structures. I don't think they're perfect, and I think they need constant renewal. I think that it's a constant struggle for us, and that every generation of Americans has to make sure that we maintain this structure that was set down and also modify it for the challenges of the current time. But I do believe in our system, and in a time when all of our institutions are being challenged and are in question, I think that might stand out a little bit, because I don't think that our system is irreparably broken. I wouldn't have run for Congress if I thought that. I do think that it needs reform, certainly, and that's what I think we all are a part of. You also mentioned oversight. I think that lawyers see oversight a little differently. If you watch any hearing of ours, you will pretty quickly be able to pick out who the lawyers are because of the way we ask questions, the kind of lanes we try to take people down. Sometimes I get a little frustrated with some of my colleagues who I think are letting the witnesses off too easy. All of the litigators in the room and prosecutors like Jennifer would know, there are ways to make sure you don't do that. But we certainly take that very seriously as well. And I think that my experience going to Cal Law School, if there's a man in the house, certainly instilled in me a belief in the importance of congressional oversight and the importance of having a system of checks and balances. And I do think that we've gotten a little bit away from that. We have to restore some of that.
So, Congressman Davids, I want you to talk about that as well, but you've had experience in the White House as a former White House fellow. And I also want to encourage both Congresswoman Davids as well as Congressman Allred, who are both athletes, as we know, to talk about how their past in the NFL and in mixed martial arts may come into at any point. Throw that in. That's just as important as being a lawyer.
I wasn't the one in the NFL.
But how does that experience, both now in the legislature, experience in the White House as an attorney, how does that all come to bear in what you do?
Well, there's a few things actually. So one thing I was thinking about while Rep. Allred was speaking is that I always grew up, I was raised by a single mom who served in the Army for 20 years and 23 days. For anybody who served, I think that everybody knows how many days. And I think that one of the things that I saw was not just public service and doing something for your country, but that I always felt this sense of gratitude that I lived in a country where if I didn't like what our government was doing, I could do something about it. And we've already seen tonight so many people who are doing exactly that work, that are seeing things about this system that I also think is, I value the system that we have here and recognize that we have a lot of work to do. But for me, that meant running for office. But for so many other people, it means making reforms, regulatory reform we were talking about earlier, pushing back for justice in a system that sometimes seems to be filled with injustice. And I think that that's something that when you were talking, that was what I was thinking about. I'm so glad to be part of this, because if I want to, I can do something about it. The thing that I think being a lawyer and having practiced law, so I was a corporate attorney. Don't hold it against me. I did mergers and acquisitions and private equity and financings, and obviously I was looking to change the world. No, but it was that foundation having. I did diligence, I worked on deals. I felt like the reason that I liked the work I did was because it wasn't adversarial. It was trying to figure out how do we come to some sort of compromise. I realized that private equity was not the place for me, but the things that I learned from that really informed the way that I approach a lot of, how we're going to make change in this system. And, I also like to think about the fact that there are some bare minimums that we learn in law school. I might not have I actually have avoided doing I didn't try to be on law review. I never tried to do moot court. I didn't want to stand in front of people and speak. The times we find ourselves in require that we do things that we might not necessarily be comfortable with, because it is all hands on deck right now. And the things that I learned in law school are very much helping me when it comes to figuring out what are the places in this system where one individual vote as a member of Congress can make a difference, where things like constituent services can make a difference, and where informing the public of exactly what each branch of our government has the power to do, that I think I'm informed very much by my legal background. And when you go to law school and they tell you, we're not teaching you how to be a lawyer, we're teaching you how to think like a lawyer. I definitely think like a lawyer, even if I didn't prosecute.
Well, Congressman Wexton, you've been in all three branches. As in the executive, judiciary, and as well as legislative at the state and federal level. Talk a little bit about that and how that legal background has informed what you have done and what you are doing.
Well, I never aspired to run for office, which I think Colin and Sharice and I share that. And that's kind of funny because I'm the one that served in elected office at the state level before running for Congress. But for me, I love the law. I went to law school at William & Mary, go Tribe, and I wanted to use my law degree to help people. And I was very excited to be able to do that as a prosecutor, as a guardian ad litem, through my career, and to have been appointed as special justice and substitute judge and be able to sit as a judge at times. I mean, it never occurred to me, you know, I'm so awesome, I should make the law. For me, it was just about applying the law. And what we do as lawyers is it's conflict resolution and it's persuasion, which is a lot of what we do as legislators as well. So for me, when I first stepped up to run for office, it was in the state legislature, and it was because I saw the state legislature in Virginia doing things that I didn't agree with. I saw them repealing things like the one handgun a month law. I saw them imposing very strict voter ID, voter suppression laws. And I saw, you know, this was at the time of the whole transvaginal ultrasounds and everything. So when there was a real question about how the majority was going to be in the state Senate, I stepped up and I ran, and it turns out I'm pretty good at it. So I went down to Richmond and I saw that there weren't a lot of people down there that looked like me. There was nobody who had my background. And because of the background that I had a lot of credibility and was able to kind of work across the aisle and get things done. And I loved being in the state legislature, but then obviously November 2016 happened, and I felt the need to once again step up, and I wouldn't be doing it if I weren't really concerned that our republic and our democracy was hanging by a thread. Because seeing the attacks on the institutions was the thing that was most frightening for me, as a big believer in the rule of law, because without the rule of law, nothing else can exist. And seeing attacks on free press, attacks on an independent judiciary, you know, attacks on American intelligence community, attacks on facts, I knew that I had to step up and run, and I'm glad that I did. And it's really heartening for me because our freshman class has a lot of new historic firsts, many of which came in pairs, like you and Deb, and first 2 Muslim American women, first 2 Latinas ever elected from the state of Texas. But yeah. It's nice that we women do that. We bring a girlfriend along with us. But it's a lot of folks who are doing this for the right reasons. Because it's not about, I know Colin didn't run because it wasn't about Colin, it wasn't about Sharice, it wasn't about me, it was about the greater good and the needs that our nation has. So I think we're in pretty good hands, but as far as oversight and everything is concerned, as lawyers, you know, we know what to look for. We know what the questions are to ask, and we know how to present information. And I think that will benefit all of us as in the coming months, for sure.
Well, I want to bounce off of that. I mean, you were pointing to specific areas that were of concern to you. How do you all choose which areas that you want to focus on? I mean, we've heard tonight about everything from immigration to other issues. You were a former civil rights attorney. How do you focus substantively on what is most important to you, and how does your legal background factor into that?
Well, I think Jennifer and Sharice would agree with me that our agendas are driven by our districts. We are here representative as both our job title and our job description. So we have to represent our communities and our districts. I was born and raised in the district that I represent. Like Sharice, I was raised by a single mother who taught in Dallas public schools. And so Dallas and the district that I represent have discrete needs that I need to make sure I'm working on. That's why I wanted to be on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Those were all driven by what my district needs and what I wanted to work on. But then there are also, I think we all have projects that we are particularly interested in and things that we throw ourselves into because we have expertise in that area. I was a voting rights attorney, did voting rights litigation. We certainly have some issues around the country with that. And one of the first pieces of legislation we all passed was H.R. 1, the For the People Act. We clap for ourselves, which was the most sweeping anti-corruption, pro-democracy bill that we've had come out of Congress in a generation. The Senate should take it up. They should at least debate it. And if you have a senator who's a part of that, contact them and tell them to make sure that they take it up. The American people at least deserve to have a debate about it. If you're concerned with the first part of the Mueller report, which details the Russian activities in our elections, H.R. 1 tries to address many of those things through election security. There's voting rights components to it. There's campaign finance components to it. Those are all things that scratch my itches as well, because I am concerned about the structural problems that we have in place. I'm concerned about the things that make it so that your voice doesn't work or doesn't get through to your government. And I think that's the biggest thing that we are facing, is that we have a structure, but then we have barriers that have been put in place through, I would say sometimes corrupt means, but also through decisions I disagree with at the Supreme Court that now have to be taken on and I think changed if we're going to deliver what we want to for our constituents.
So I definitely, associate myself with Representative's comments, but I would say that in addition to, healthcare was the biggest issue that people were concerned about when I was running for office, and I might have thought that climate change would be the main focus of my campaign when I very first started. Very first day, if you would have asked me, what are your top priorities? I might have said climate change, and then and then healthcare, and then every time I talked to people, it didn't matter if I was talking to. So I'm in Kansas, so it didn't matter if I was talking to folks who are mostly Democrats, mostly Republicans. We have a lot of unaffiliated or independent voters in Kansas. Everyone's worried about healthcare and how they're going to pay for their prescription drugs. How are they going to make sure that they understand the bills they're about to get hit with, and being a woman shouldn't be a pre-existing condition. And so there was a lot of that is I have to find ways to get into those spaces, because I also serve on transportation and infrastructure and small business. I advocated really hard to get onto the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee because, when I was a White House fellow, I spent my day-to-day at the Department of Transportation. I like to call myself a born-again transportation enthusiast because I hadn't thought, like a lot of people, I didn't think as much about the ways that transportation and infrastructure policy impact what opportunities communities have. It touches every aspect of our lives: healthcare, education, places of worship, places of recreation, which I think a lot of times we forget that every community should have access to that. And then, our jobs. And so when I think about how being a lawyer has impacted that, it's really more about, it's less about the specific policy areas and more about the process. Because I've got the ideas about the policy areas, and a lot of that comes from folks I've talked to and the work I've done. But how do what are the processes that I have in place to evaluate decisions that I'm making? If I learned anything from being a lawyer, it's that never take anything for granted, never make assumptions, ask tons of questions regardless of which side of an issue you're on. There are all kinds of processes that I have in place. We have a system for every single bill that I co-sponsor, if I'm going to sign on to a letter or not, which there's a lot of letters in Congress. And it's for everything, because that will be the way that I make sure that I am supporting things that I actually am interested in supporting or not. And then the concept of the rule of law. Like I think that when I was in law school, so as a Native person in this country, I knew that the history books did not reflect the experience of Native people in this country. I knew that that opportunities were cut off to Native communities, and that somehow that felt intentional. But when I started learning like federal Indian law as a body of law, which I like to call constitutional law on steroids, is that the role of our court system and the role of Congress in is it me?
Very good.
Okay. In just for purposes of one group in this country, and like imagining how that plays out across the board for communities that are consistently marginalized over and over, thinking about the fact that, I mean, we have so many people who, when we passed HR 6, the thing that made, oh, I'm sorry. Look, I've turned into a DC person, I guess. So HR 1 was the For the People Act. When we passed the Dream and Promise Act, and every single Democrat said it matters that we have a pathway to citizenship for our dreamers. It matters that we're protecting people who are coming to our country. The thing that I think about is that, like, what we're talking about are communities that are consistently marginalized and in a lot of cases don't have a vote in this process. And every single person in that room, every single Democrat on the floor that day voted, and it wasn't because we were saying this is the path to re-election. It is the path to re-election because it's doing the right thing, because it's doing the thing that we are supposed to be doing under our own set of laws, under international law, under all of the things that we as a country have said, these are important to us. This is the rule of law and we are going to follow it.
So speaking of the law and the rule of law, I know I was happy as a journalist that I was also a lawyer on April 18th when the Mueller report dropped, because it was 400 plus pages that you needed to go through and digest very quickly. I will say that I did read the Mueller report. I'm surprised by how few people have in this town. But when it comes to something like that, I mean, you were talking about a process. That's a process. That's going through a major document about several major issues, about not only the interference of a foreign country into our election systems, but what the people in and around the White House did in connection to that. Talk about how being a lawyer informs not only how you processed that piece of that document that was, according to the author, was directed at you guys. You are the audience, and it's up to you what to do next. How that informed how you processed it, and what you think should happen next.
I talked for so long.
My turn. My turn. You throw me the softball for this one. So first thing, I really enjoyed the Mueller report because I like well-written work product, and that was some really well-written work product. And although it was 448 pages, it seemed to say the same thing over and over. And so I, unlike a lot of people, was very excited to read it, including the legal analysis and everything. It seems pretty clear that Robert Mueller is saying, okay, I've done what I can do under the constraints that I had. Now, ball's in your court, Congress. What are you going to do? What people may not realize is that we've been very active in using our oversight function in Congress already. And the committees of jurisdiction have been hard at work basically since day one, requesting documents and information to financial services. We're going to be getting bank records. Oversight is doing a lot with also accounting records, ways and means, intelligence, judiciary. So those committees are all hard at work getting information. And we have been going through the processes, and I feel like we're going to get a lot of information that Robert Mueller never looked at, because he didn't look at any financial information. And I think that's really important for us to have information about, both in terms of our oversight function and in terms of our legislative function. And thankfully, the judicial branch has been backing us up. We had some very great court decisions come down that made it pretty clear that that information is going to have to be turned over. So we have been very actively working on this. We're going to be getting more information in the days that come, and I anticipate we will be digesting that, and we will be looking through it, digesting the information, and then presenting it in an appropriate manner to the public.
Yeah, I just wonder if the Mueller report has the most citations of at Real Donald Trump Twitter account in any document. I mean, it was all out in the open, right? It was just there. He's kind of like, yeah, this is December 12th, December 13th. I agree completely with what Congresswoman Wexton was saying about our committees of jurisdiction, and also about the scope of the investigation, because it is a broader scope of what we're looking into than what the Mueller, than what the parameters he was given to do. And I just want to say that it's also very important, if the document was addressed to us, that we see the entire document and that we're able to see the corroborating evidence for it. And I'm cognizant that I'm sitting here with Pam Carlin, and I'm sitting here with some of our luminaries in the legal profession to say that a request from Congress to show up is not optional. Okay? There's no scenario in which you're considering and you need to wonder and have an internal struggle over whether or not you should comply with a subpoena. These are not optional things. And the entire system of our rule of law, I think, is based on the idea that if you are told by a body with jurisdiction to show up, to turn over documents, that you do so, whether it's a police officer, whether it's a magistrate court, or whether it's the United States Congress. And this is a very dangerous thing for us as a country. And I agree with Jennifer about the importance of the judicial branch supporting us in this, because if a precedent was set in which any administration, let's just take out the current administration, if any administration could just say, no, we're going to ignore your oversight responsibilities, we're going to ignore your requests because we think that we're going to determine unilaterally that they are beyond the scope of whatever your jurisdiction is, then we might as well just all go home in the Congress and just have only one person ruling us at a time, and we can just go back to monarchy that we split off from when we had the whole revolution thing. So to me, that is how fundamental it is, the idea the importance of our oversight role and the importance of us being allowed to be that check and a balance. It is one of the most foundational things that we have. When I was in the Obama administration, I did what we call oversight, where we respond to Congress, we respond to requests from Congress. We never thought of it as optional, and it's not. And I know with all these lawyers in the room that we probably share that sentiment. But we need to make sure that that people understand the importance of these structures, and understand how important that is to being ultimately a check against any form of tyranny. So.
So I'm glad that I went to law school, because when I was reading through the Mueller report, that would have been the only time that I would have learned about there's a lot. Yes, very good work product. But there was a lot in there that I think I also read the Mueller report. Since I'm not on the relevant committees, I had to do it like on the plane, which I wondered if reading it on the plane would get some kind of like social media thing. I'm like, yeah. But I'm concerned. I am concerned about in the immediate the subpoena issue. You don't deal with that too much when you're putting a deal together and financings and stuff. But I do know that's not how privilege works. You show up and then you assert your privilege. You don't assert it from far away. So I'm like, it's unacceptable. Not showing up when you've been subpoenaed is unacceptable. And I think that having people who understand the legal system is very helpful in that, because I know based on some of the questions that I get asked by people, well, what do you think about it? There's really only one thing to think about it, that it's unacceptable. Right. And so that's I'm putting that out there. And then as far as, how does being a lawyer help me determine the direction I'm going to go, or that sort of thing? I'm doing the diligence that I need to do so that when the relevant committees bring something to the full House and we have to vote on something, I will know that I have done the diligence that I need to do, and I read everything. When they produce whatever they're going to produce, whether it be a resolution or an inquiry, whatever it is, I'm going to read through it, and I will have a deep understanding of it because I've been doing the diligence as we go along. And I think that is something that we need to see a bit more of is, you know, I was concerned when I heard people making pronouncements within hours of the Mueller report coming out. If you had pronouncements about what was in it, then you didn't read the Mueller report. So, you know, I think that we would all do better to breathe and read and think and be like discerning about how and what pronouncements we make as members of Congress until we've seen the full Mueller report, the underlying documents, and what the relevant committees put before us. I don't sit on those committees. I depend on my colleagues. I sit on Transportation and Infrastructure. I'm the vice chair of the Aviation Subcommittee, and right now we are exercising our oversight powers on the certification process for planes, because that is the role that I play in this Congress. And the people on the Judiciary Committee, my expectation is that they think I'm doing my job. I think they're doing their job. It might not be moving at the pace that some people want to see, but this isn't not just about that. If I know anything, it's that if you don't dot all your I's and cross all your T's and do all the diligence you need to be doing, I mean, that's malpractice. So, like, we need to make sure that that people are going through the process that they're supposed to be going through, and I think that my colleagues are doing that.
So it's not just lawmakers. I mean, it's literally your job to make laws. So that's why it tended to be lawyers who would occupy these seats, even though that's declining. But very often, the folks who occupied the White House, Oval Office, have had law degrees. Not now. Talk a little bit about what it's like to deal with an administration that is run by someone who is not only not a lawyer, but someone, and I think I can say as a journalist from a factual basis, who does not seem to have a really firm grasp of the law or Constitution or how it works.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting time to be in Congress. I do think that I have never more believed in the necessary education of civics in our schools, making sure that people understand the process. There are conversations that I have on a pretty regular basis that make it very clear to me that we have a lot of work to do, making sure that we understand our own government and making sure that we educate our folks about what it means as when we're talking about a battle over a subpoena. It might just seem like it's Democrats and Republicans doing what they always do. It's absolutely not. It's not a Democratic power to subpoena something. It's a congressional power. And it could be used by either party. It could be used by whoever's in power at that time. But it's something that it goes beyond just the kind of partisan fights of the day. And it's very true that we are dealing with an administration that has a fundamental either lack of understanding or disrespect for not only the law but also tradition. And one of the things that I talked about in the campaign that I firmly believe in that we need to be doing now, and I think we are doing, is that many of the norms that we've had as a country that we've expected to be followed, that have been followed by previous presidents of both parties, followed by previous administrations, those norms are going to have to become law. We've seen that. So, disclosing your financial ties, was an optional thing. I think it would have to become something that is no longer optional. Nepotism laws, making sure that we aren't being corrupted in some way through connections to our own families. All of these things, these expectations that we've set, we're going to have to try and dig in and make sure that we've plugged some of these gaps. And so I think that's something that I've certainly noticed with dealing with this administration that's going to be different going forward. But I'm hopeful, and I still believe, as I said, in our system that we can do it within this system. But it's going to make sure that we're going to have people of goodwill on both sides who understand the changes that need to be made.
I agree. So I'm less concerned about the fact that the president and a number of people that are in his cabinet, like that they don't have law degrees. Because I think a lot of the things, I hate to say this here, but I think a lot of the things that we learn as lawyers can be learned without having, I have a lot of student loan debt. I probably could have learned a lot of this stuff not going to Cornell. I went to Cornell for law school. I didn't do the shout out that they did, but I see you. I mean, I'm glad I went. I hit my stride in life when I got there, but one of the things that I'm really concerned about is that it's the disrespect for the institutions. It's the lack of understanding about just how the federal government works, how the separation of powers work, that we're co-equal branches of government. It's that, like, there's not even a desire to learn it. And if anything, I think this, like, idea of being, like, I think of people who are lawyers as being kind of like intellectually curious, you know, having a desire to learn about anything, lots of things. And what we've seen is an administration that has, in a lot of ways, tried to make it, you know, part of the norm that you have no desire to learn, and that is so bad for our country that he doesn't even have the desire to figure out how the government works, and then is appointing people to positions of great power to run institutions that they may have been trying to dismantle before they got here. That you know, we've got people who don't understand the basic functions of, let's say, housing, running the Housing and Urban Development Department. That is way more concerning to me than what the actual profession of the person was. That's all I have to say about that.
I just want to, yeah. Sharice totally said exactly what I was thinking, because saying that he's just is ignorant of the you know, the three branches of government and how civics works and stuff like that, I think is letting him off too easy. What's frightening to me is how this administration has systematically appointed people to head agencies who are overtly hostile to the mission of those agencies. And we see it at HUD, we see it at CFPB, we see it at OMB, we see it at EPA, I mean, every single one. And that frightens me, because those agencies are all here to protect Americans and to protect the environment, to protect, you know, the rule of law. And they're really being attacked from the inside now. And that's one of the things that I find most frightening. And that's going to have long-lasting repercussions.
So talk about how you measure success then. I mean, for lawyers, it's winning cases, it's successfully executing a contract. There's some objective at the end of the day. In a Congress, I mean, for decades, I've been writing about how Congress is, you know, gridlocked and not a lot gets done, and you have a Senate that is under Republican control and really stonewalling anything from getting through. You have a White House that seems to be in constant opposition to the House. In this position, now that you're here, how do you measure success if it's not a piece of past bipartisan legislation? What does it look like to you?
I can tell you what it is for me right now. Because you're right, there's a lot of gridlock. We've sent a lot of fantastic legislation over to the Senate, and it's sitting there in Mitch McConnell's inbox, and will probably be ignored. But for me, one of the great things that I am able to do is constituent services. I mean, this is, you know, as I said, I went to law school because I want to help people, and I get to help people on a huge scale, because I have an amazing team in my district who are working very hard for people with problems with Social Security, problems with their VA benefits, problems with immigration, problems with, you know, with their passport expired, problems with whatever it is. Even if it's something where, you know, it's a benefits issue that is a state's issue, that my folks are still helping them. And so that is really great, the fact that we can pick up the phone and say, I'm calling from Congresswoman Wexton's office, and we get stuff done for people. Yeah, yeah. So that is reassuring and good to know that we are able to do that. I still, you know, I think there are still some things that we can do legislatively. I'm not going to be the chief patron of HR 1 or the chief sponsor of HR 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but I've gotten real good at putting amendments on things that help my constituents, and hopefully, some of those will eventually become law, and be able to do that legislatively as well.
Yeah, and I would also say that there's a lot of things bad things that we've stopped from happening.
Right.
For example, we are defending the ACA in court now. The House of Representatives is. That was a resolution that was my resolution, the Allred resolution that passed with actually bipartisan support. But the House is the only, with the former Solicitor General here, the only body. The only federal body that's defending the ACA right now is the House. The DOJ is not. And so it's very important that we're part of this litigation and that we are preventing this continuing undermining of Americans' health care. We have passed important legislation, of course. I'm extremely proud of our votes recently for the Equality Act, for the Dreamers, the DREAM Act, and for the Promise Act. Those are all important votes. But we've also, through our oversight functions and by taking back the House, prevented so many things that were going to necessarily continue to happen had we not been here. And so there's certainly a measure of success in that. And just because we send it to the Senate and it doesn't get through doesn't mean it's not important. If you were in the House gallery or saw what happened after we passed the DREAM Act the other night, you would see how important that was to those activists and to those young people who spend so much work on that. It certainly, even though the Senate is not going to act on it right away, it still matters very much.
I'm glad you brought that piece up. I have a couple of different thoughts, but I think the same thing about the Equality Act. When I think about the impact that having an entire body of the federal government say, it's important that you're not discriminated against. It's important that you have the same civil rights as any other group, as LGBTQ people. I think that, just having that can save lives in the same way I think that the Dream and Promise Act can as well. Because the suicide rate amongst young LGBTQ people is it's staggering, and we now have a body of leadership in this country, now more leadership than we've seen in Congress before, but a body of leadership saying, like, you're important, we see you, it matters, you matter, not discriminating against you is important. And I think that's something that I consider to be success of what we're doing here. That I think of the success of my serving in Congress as being there's what's going on right now, and it's the same things that they've talked about. So I agree with my two colleagues here. But long term, I actually think that I probably won't see the benefits of this Congress, and hopefully next time around we'll see a bit more progress in the White House, in the Senate. But I think that, like, when I think about the impact that we're having, it is likely that I will be dead and gone, hopefully in a while, but dead and gone by the time, because these are systemic things that we're trying to address here. If we have more transparency in our campaign finance, if we have more people able to come out and vote, yes, we will see it because elections have consequences, we'll see it now, but over the long term, because right now if you just think about infrastructure, we're right now operating on the infrastructure that our grandparents built. And were they thinking as much about equity as the people who are sitting up here right now are? Probably not. Not because they were bad people. Some of them might have been, but we're actively, intentionally trying to build a system that is more equitable and provides more opportunity for people. And that means that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to be the ones that see that. We're building an infrastructure and a political system and creating political power that will, the fruits of that labor, I might not even see in my lifetime. And history will tell us how much of an impact we had, but just knowing that I get to participate with the three of us up here, with Deb Haaland, with all the new incoming freshmen and everybody who's out here working so hard, like we're in this together. And we are creating the future for our grandchildren. And that to me is a success in and of itself.
Well, hold on. I just have to say,
Yeah.
your presence in the Congress absolutely makes a huge difference. And we've had a great class that's come in. And we have so many people who are trailblazers, but you're absolutely right about the historic importance of this class. Congress should look more like the American people, and it does because of this class.
Well, I can't think of a way to make an hour go by faster than with a discussion with these three members of Congress. Please join me once again in thanking them for this discussion.